Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. In today's video I am mounting a winch to the front of my Ford Escape, which is not something that people commonly do. Previously I attached a front receiver to the Escape, fabricated this myself, and it's bolted to the frame rails on the front, and the winch is going to go right on top of that. So this is a Apex Badland Apex winch. Picked it up at Harbor Freight, and this by no means is sponsored. I don't have any sponsored. I paid my own money for this, something like $260 or $70. And actually this is marketed as a UTV winch. It's a fairly small winch, and I want a small winch for the Escape for packaging and mounting, and honestly the Escape isn't that heavy. Dry, the Escape weighs like 3,700 pounds, and this is rated even at the when the line is fully in, so the drum's kind of larger because all the cable's wound on it. There's 50 feet of cable, by the way. It's rated to pull like 3,550 pounds when it's fully loaded in, and that's basically if you're like dragging a car, that much weight. If this is just pulling in neutral, or if I need help getting over some rocks or out of a mud hole, it's not really pulling the full weight. But even if it had to, I think that this winch would do it. And I could always add a snatch block if I need to and wrap it back around to the receiver or to the frame underneath. But tell me what you think in the comments here. Do you think this winch is big enough? Do you think it looks good mounted on the Escape? Is there something else that you wouldn't typically mount a winch on that you've put a winch on in the past? Let me know what you think. Do you think it's going to break? Do you think the whole receiver is going to just rip off the front? I don't think so, and we'll do some testing later in this video as well. So this kit comes with everything that you need to install it, essentially, as long as you have a place to mount it. All the cables. It comes with a trigger inside, a little toggle switch for line in, line out. It also has a remote on about 10 foot of cord, so you can plug it in inside, bring it around the front or a little bit out of the way, and it's got in and out controls on that as well. And the same plug that remote plugs into, you can buy an additional wireless remote that'll plug into that same outlet that I've already installed as part of this winch kit. So let's get to it. I'm going to show you basically the whole installation process, what it looks like along the way, then we'll get to some testing. So I've got the front bumper cover back off of here, which came off pretty quickly because I had to do it too many times when I installed this front receiver on the Escape. But I'm optimistic that this is actually going to work as a good place to mount the winch. So as you can see here, I've got my front receiver bolted to the frame rails. And right about here, you can kind of see where the dust stops and it becomes cleaner. I had this out at Silver Lake Sand Dunes last weekend, so everything's kind of dusty. But this is a good indication for how far out the bumper cover comes. So I think that the winch is going to be a little bit recessed into the bumper cover, which is fine. What I'm mostly concerned about is here's the AC condenser, and right now I am like right up against that. And you can see that this hole is partially blocked by the receiver behind it. This hole is open. But I've got enough material here where I could cut off, a 1/4 inch or so, so I can push this plate backwards and be able to get the bolts in these holes. I have to have bolts in these holes because that's what holds the winch to this plate, and this plate is going to be eventually welded to this receiver. Now, it looks like it's a little bit off-center, and it's not centered with the receiver here, but actually the receiver is off-centered just because that's how the width worked out. Because of how it mounted to the van, it's a little bit off-center. All right, I've got the winch just sitting in place here. It's not bolted on, but the mounting holes in the bottom of the winch are lined up with the plate. So this is actually where it will sit. And it is a pretty tight fit here. I've got a little bit of room to work with. Maybe, come on, focus camera. Maybe like 1/8 of an inch or so, but that is probably all that we need. And the other thing I'm a little concerned about is that one of our power leads is very close. Put my finger behind there so you can see. It is very close to the AC condenser. So I may be kind of shaving down the end of that terminal as well once I have the wire attached. Now the AC condenser is mounted firmly in here, so that doesn't really move around. So, I mean, just by the skin of my teeth, I think that this is going to fit here where I want it. And then I'll have to cut a hole in the front of the bumper to make everything fit through the bumper. But again, this is a reason why I don't want to go larger than this winch, this 5,500 pounder, because I have really limited room up here to mount something. And this winch is surprisingly heavy for how small it is. I mean, winches are, it's got a 1.5 horsepower motor. They're just by nature heavy. So getting a larger winch would be even more weight. And I want to keep the weight on my front end to a minimum as well. So, first impressions, I mean, this is pretty awesome, right? So, yeah, I'm happy with that. I mean, even these cuts turned out awesome. Looks basically like it came from the factory this way. So I trimmed that bracket up a little bit so it wouldn't touch the AC condenser, and then bolted the winch to the bracket and set it back in place here. And found a new problem that I'll have to do a little bit of modification to overcome. Let me show you here. So back, if you look at the bottom here, where this bolts to the bracket, they don't quite clear both sides of the receiver. And really the problem is that on the back side here, you can see that there's a little like reinforcement bracket there. And that's really, I think, what's keeping this from just sitting flush on top of this receiver. So I'm going to pull this whole receiver off the front here. Then I can get in there and grind that spot where the bolt wants to sit. I'll just grind that down a little bit. And then I think this is all going to sit properly in place. So I'll be able to mock it up again and then start welding this onto this. All right, so I've got the receiver up here on my bench. I've got the winch here on my bench. And now you can see a little better. On the back side of this, this is that bracket I was talking about that makes this just a little bit wider than it otherwise would be. So the winch doesn't quite fit over this 2-inch receiver because it's a little bit fatter here. So, put this guy back up here. So what I'm going to do, I kind of marked where this bolt sits. I'm going to shave a little bit from where this bolt is too. I put a little bit of marker around that. I'm just going to take my grinder and cut away a little bit of that area so that this mount can sit flush against the receiver with the bolts in here. And I need enough room where I could take a wrench and get these bolts back out. Even if that means I got to take this whole receiver off to get the bolts out. That's okay, as long as I can, take the winch off in case I need to replace it or use it on something else. So let's grind these out and see if we can make clearance for this bracket to sit on here properly. We'll get her welded in place. All right, so I got this guy carved out a little bit on the front side where the fasteners go. So now you can see that that bracket is sitting nice and flush. all around. And not only that, but I also can move the whole thing. So I've got a little bit of extra room where I can take those bolts out down the road if I need to take this winch off for any reason. So that's great. So I'm going to take the winch back off the bracket, then do some grinding to expose some metal and weld that bracket to the receiver. Then put the winch back on and put the winch back up there. Alright, so it's a couple days later now, and I've got the mount for the winch welded onto the receiver that goes on the front of the Escape, which I previously fabricated, and it turned out pretty good here. So if you take a look at it, I got a little booger on the weld hanging off there, but I basically welded it here, over here, then on the bottom along that edge, and on the back end over here also. And I clearanced it so that I can still get all of the bolts for the winch in and out, except for this one here that I can actually like loosen and tighten. I can put the winch on and off, but this bolt is, there's not enough room to get it out. So anyhow, let's get the winch back on here and get this ready to go back on the car. Okay everyone, so it's been a couple of days and I've been plugging away at the wiring on this. So I've got the winch actually final mounted on the front here. The winch mount is welded to the trailer receiver I previously put on there. But it's been a lot more wiring than I expected to get this to work. So up here, on the winch itself, there's only 2 wires. And depending on what direction, if you want to, the winch to pull in, the polarity is going to be, I don't know which side, but it's going to be, positive one side, negative the other. And if you're doing winch out, then it reverses and it's positive the other way, negative on the opposite side. So there's only 2 wires to the actual winch. But in order to make this all work, you have to have this solenoid box, and it also comes with a shutoff switch. So I moved the ground out of the way, mounted the solenoid box, and this has a negative going to the battery. It has a positive cable, it goes to the shutoff switch, then that goes to the battery. There is no fuse in that though, so I actually wired that down to the starter because there is a fuse going to the starter. So hopefully I don't pop that and then I can't start the engine. But this is going to be, you only use the winch with the engine running anyhow. So if I pop the fuse, the engine's running. But anyhow, you got positive, negative, and then here's those 2 cables that go out to the winch, and they reverse polarity with the solenoid box depending on what direction you're going. But to make that work, I've got a couple of cables that go down into the car here. And inside then, one of them goes to this plug here where you can plug in a remote. So I've got that remote under the hood right now. Got some wires underneath here I need to tuck up better. There's where it goes out to the engine compartment. And then it goes behind my console here, and I've got a toggle switch here for winch in, winch out. So that's why the wiring took so long. Then also, when I was doing the wiring inside, I closed the driver's door by accident onto one of the connectors for the cable that goes to the toggle switch in the console, and I broke the connector. So then I had to cut all those wires apart and ended up just soldering them together to make all that work. But now that I have all that in place, I still have a little bit of, tucking the wires away, securing all that stuff. I got to put the front end of the car back together, but the winch actually works now. So I'll show you that. Let's give it a try. So it just has a couple buttons out and in, and it works just like you'd expect it to. So I'm going to put this onto the shackle here, and this probably is how this is normally going to be, sitting when I'm not using it. Yeah, just like that. So when I'm not using it, it'll be all neat and tidy here, secured. and then just gotta let it out a little bit so I can pull the rest of the winch out. It also has a free spool mode here, so I can turn the knob on the winch to free spool, and then you can pull it out by hand. So if you're going, 20, 30, 40 feet away, you can just free spool it and grab this and pull it with you. So go back to engaged, and there we have it. All right, everyone, so I've got the Escape here with the winch, and it is hooked up to a tree over here, and I want to see if the Escape can neutral pull itself. Kind of a test for the winch. I haven't tested this receiver very much at all, so I want to see, how this does. Does my whole setup hold up, and what does it take to pull the Escape? Then after that, if it can neutral pull itself, I might apply the brakes a little bit and see if it can pull with a bit of resistance. So let's give it a shot. All right, here we go. Look at that. Let's apply the brakes a bit here. It's my parking brake. Alright, that's going to be much harder now. Still pulling itself. Quite a bit more resistance. Yeah, it's pretty tight there. Alright, let's see. See how much it's spotted down there? Alright, so that's a pretty good test there. The Escape pulled itself no problem in neutral. Then with the brakes on, it still pulled pretty well, even to the point where I applied the brakes and it was squatting while it pulled. So I think that's a pretty good test for the front receiver. We'll be going off-roading soon on some tough trails, so I think that's going to hold up well for us. So thanks for watching, and have a great day.